He hit me in my own backyard because I told him no, because I wouldn't let a stranger in a uniform treat my pool like a locker room shower, because I didn't lower my eyes and play along. And if that makes your stomach flip, then stay with me. Because what happened next wasn't a miracle or a movie, it was a choice, followed by another choice, followed by a whole chain of people doing the job they promised to do. You know what I mean? Late July in Oak Ridge Estates, the kind of quiet suburb that polishes its rules like trophies, the air heavy, the water in my pool, a bright slice of turquoise, the glass of iced tea sweating on the table, my phone face down for once, my body finally unclenching after weeks of chasing other people's trouble. I remember the sound more than anything. At first, the gate latch clicking when it should have knocked the boots hitting the patio without a hello, and I raised my sunglasses like a curtain, and there he was, stocky, mid-40s, uniform snug where a treadmill would have done better, a nameplate that read D. Harding, one hand resting on his belt like it had something to say, the other shading his eyes like he owned the sun and the grin. That grin men get when they've already decided who you are before you open your mouth. "Hot one today," he said, eyes sliding over me like a barcode. "Mind if I cool off with you? That water looks inviting." And the way he said inviting told me he wasn't asking for water at all. He was checking how much space he could take, testing the fence to see if the nails were real or just paint. I sat up without reaching for a towel, because this was my home, and my skin is not an apology. Kept my voice even. "Can I help you, officer? This is private property. If you need something, you can ask me from the patio. Otherwise, I need you to leave." He chuckled like we had a secret, like we were playing a role I hadn't agreed to. "Just doing my rounds, making sure the neighborhood is secure," he said. Then he took a step onto the travertine and his boots left wet prints as if the humidity itself wanted me to remember. "Come on, don't be difficult. I'm being neighborly, unless there's a reason you don't want me taking a closer look," and then that little shrug, that cheap insinuation hanging in the heat, "You the new cleaning girl, or you just enjoying perks while the owners are out?" That thing that lives in the back of your throat when you're used to being underestimated stood up and put its hands on my shoulders, but my face didn't change. "I am the homeowner, officer, and you're standing where you shouldn't be. Please step back to the gate," and something in his eyes flickered. Not doubt, ego, like a dog that hears the word heel and decides who's holding the leash. He crowded my space, took the sun away with his shadow look. "Sweetheart, let's not turn this into paperwork. I'm hot. There's a pool. You're here. I'm the law in this town. Be appreciative." And he let his gaze drop like a dare, and I felt the click inside me. The 1 years of training give you de-escalate, if you can document, if you can't hold the line either way. "Officer Harding, leave now. That is a lawful order on my property." And the word order burned his pride like acid, because the smirk turned to a hard, flat line, and the next moment became a sharp snapshot from a disposable camera, his hand coming up fast in a wide arc. No hesitation, no warning, just the hard slap of skin on skin, the sound bouncing off the pool and the stucco and my ribs, my ear ringing the world turning narrow and bright, and the way his chest puffed afterward, like he'd corrected a child. That detail I'll never forget. I felt the sting. I felt the anger. But most of all, I felt the sudden quiet clarity that follows a boundary being crossed. And I heard my own voice, like it was coming from a steady place deep under the turbulence. "You just assaulted me in my own yard." And he snorted assault. "I was correcting your attitude. I'm placing you under arrest for trespassing and resisting. Turn around, hands behind your back," and the cuffs went on too tight. Not by accident, the metal biting each click like a man saying, "I can." And if you've ever been humiliated on purpose, you know, the heat in your cheeks isn't the sun. It's the math of someone else's power being weaponized in the open. Yeah, that happened. He walked me barefoot down the side path, the stones hot and gritty, past windows where blinds were suddenly fascinating, past a neighbor with a hose who turned it off and slipped inside, past the tidy roses that still smelled sweet, like they hadn't witnessed anything. And he pushed me into the back of his cruiser, the vinyl hot, the air conditioner blasting like a defense against what he'd done. And we rolled through town with him humming a nothing tune, a man in love with his own authority, convinced the story always ends where he says it ends. And in the station with the beige walls, the color of old teeth, and the coffee that tastes like burned toast, he walked me to a little room with a metal table, bolted chairs, a two-way mirror that pretends not to watch you get one call, he said. "Make it count." and he was thinking mom or boyfriend or a public defender who'd spend 20 minutes on hold. I dialed 10 numbers without looking. A private line I keep for emergencies. I hoped I'd never use it rang once. Maya came, the voice the calm that makes mayors sit up straight. "Are you hurt?" And my mouth did what training taught it. "I've been assaulted and illegally detained by Officer Dale Harding of Northwood PD. Chief Frank Miller is aware I am secure for now." And there was a breath on the other end. That was not a sigh, it was a weight settling. "Give me names, positions, location," he said. I gave them, and my brother, Governor Marcus Vance, said, "I'm handling it. Do not argue." And the line went quiet, like a switch. If you think politics is cables and speeches, understand this. The most powerful lever is sometimes a single clean sentence spoken into the right ear, and you let the machine do what it was built for, not because you want to flex, but because accountability doesn't knock. When abuse hides behind a badge, it enters with a warrant and receipts. 10 minutes, 15:20. I sat there listening to a station. I suddenly understood the way a mechanic hears an engine, the clank of a closing cell, the murmur of a dispatcher, the anxious laugh of a man telling his version to his friends so he can believe it. And then the tide changed, not loud, not theatrical. First the sound of multiple engines outside idling in sync. Then the front door opening with purpose and boots that move in a pattern you only hear when people drill for months. And across the lobby a voice I didn't recognize calling in a tone that makes even proud men obey. "This is a state action. All Northwood personnel, place your weapons on your desks and your hands on your heads." And that small department, that little empire where a few men thought no one could see, turned into a crime scene under bright fluorescent lights in the time it takes to drink a cup of coffee. The first face at my door was a woman in a slate suit, Investigator Davies from the Attorney General's office. Respectful eye contact. No theater. "Special Agent Vance, Governor. Vance sent us. Are you injured?" And the click of cuffs releasing felt like the first deep breath after a panic attack. "I'm fine," I said. "Wrist marks noted." And she nodded, the responsible kind, then led me out past a window into an interview room where Harding sat across from two investigators and a small recorder the size of a deck of cards, and the swagger was gone. You take away a man's audience, and sometimes you take away his script. Interrogations don't need to be clever to be effective. They need to be honest and thorough. "Why were you at the residence? An anonymous trespass call," he said, and the investigator slid dispatch logs across the table. "There is no such call. Your patrol car GPS shows you parked outside for 9 minutes before entering the yard. Your body cam video was off, but audio captured this, and my voice came through tinny but calm. You just assaulted me in my own yard." Then his recorded reply, "Assault. I'm correcting your attitude." And he flinched at the sound of himself like the rest of us do when we hear a voicemail and realize the version of our voice in our head isn't the one the world lives with, only his mismatch came with criminal charges. While that truth landed, while his mouth rehearsed and abandoned half a dozen alibis, the state team moved through the building with quiet efficiency. Computers unplugged and tagged the armory, sealed the radios, transferred to a neutral channel, filing cabinets opened and fed into evidence boxes, the picture clearing in real time and outside. When the Attorney General's office opened a hotline, the town's fear cracked and voices slid through the opening. An older man with a tremor describing how his grandson's car turned into a felony after a stop that smelled wrong from the first. "Hello," a young woman crying soft, describing a midnight pullover where the choice was a phone number or a DUI, a hardware store owner explaining a monthly donation to a benevolent fund that kept him from living under a ticket rain cloud. And each call laid another brick in a structure that looked less like a wall and more like a mirror, held up to a pattern you can't unsee once you see it. "You know what I mean?" Chief Miller tried to puff himself back into relevance, stomping into the lobby with a face the color of a stop sign, shouting about jurisdiction and politics and respect. "Where are your warrants? Who signed them? This is my station." And an officer with calm eyes answered like reading a grocery list on the authority of the governor. "Your department is under immediate administrative control. You will cooperate." And when they asked for his service weapon and badge, the room didn't cheer. The room just kept working. Morning brought cameras. Of course it did. News vans, sniff out a reckoning the way seagulls find a French fry, and Marcus insisted on no back doors because the point of accountability isn't to hide the rot, it's to cut it out where everyone can learn from the scar. So when they walked Harding down the hall with his hands behind him and Miller too, there was no jeering in the lobby, just a line of officers watching their reflection, a handful angry, some relieved, some looking at their shoes like the ground had betrayed them, and outside the microphones fired questions like nails from a gun. Officer Harding: "Is it true you assaulted a federal agent?" Chief Miller: "Did you bury brutality?" Complaints: "Is it true your department ran a slush fund and they kept their heads down and said nothing because there was nothing useful left to say?" And beyond the cameras behind the yellow tape stood the people these men had treated as props. An old woman with wet eyes but a steady chin. A young man with a cane who didn't bother to glare, just watched, and that quiet is heavier than any boo. You want to know if I felt satisfaction? I felt something deeper than a high five. Something like the moment a surgeon says it all came out clean. Like you can breathe without a weight for the first time in months. But a breath isn't the end. It's the start of the work. And the work was long and not very cinematic audits and interviews and long days in rooms with bad coffee where details get hammered into place. So the result holds up in the light, and in the end, 17 officers faced charges ranging from perjury to civil rights violations. The department was disbanded and rebuilt with state oversight and a civilian review board that actually had bite. The so-called benevolent fund became a court-ordered restitution fund. Body cams had to stay on, unless you wrote a reason that survived. More than a shrug, training wasn't a video anymore. It was hands-on and uncomfortable and measured. As for the two at the center of this mess, Miller took a plea and a long sentence that will outlive his excuses. Harding rolled his dice and met a jury that listened with both ears, guilty on all counts, that mattered 40 years with no parole, and the judge said a sentence that landed like a clean nail. A badge is not a crown. Mr. Harding, it is a burden you were not strong enough to carry, and there was no speech from him, just a man who finally understood that his castle had always been fear-shaped like a building, and fear collapses when the light gets in. Weeks later, I sat by the same pool at almost the same hour, and the quiet felt honest. This time, not borrowed. My brother took off his jacket and loosened his tie, and for the first time in days, he let his shoulders drop. "Final report's out," he said. "It's going to be the model for departments our size." And I told him good. Because the point isn't what happened to me. It's what happens the next time someone says no to a man who thinks his badge is a hall pass. And we didn't need to say the rest out loud, that my story happened to land under the umbrella of a family connection that opened doors fast. And that is not a plan, that's a privilege. And if that truth makes you uncomfortable, hold on to it, because discomfort is a tool if you use it. Life trickled back into normal in small ways that matter more than the press conference. A rookie officer at the new department held the door for an older man at the restitution office and said, "Sir, we're here if you need anything." And the man nodded, like a tight knot had loosened one notch. Mrs. Franklin, the neighbor who pretended her hose was broken while I was led away, stopped me at the mailbox and apologized in a rush I didn't need but accepted anyway. And I told her next time if she hears a slap, she needs to step onto the sidewalk and ask a question, because silence is a kind of vote. And she swallowed and said, "I will, and we'll see." And that's what accountability looks like at street level, not perfect, not finished, but moving. People ask if I regret not fighting him right there in the yard, if I wish I'd thrown an elbow or a law book or a prayer, and I tell them the same thing every time I let the system do what it was supposed to do, because that's the only story that scales. You can't build safety on 1,000 separate acts of self-defense. You build it on rules enforced at the speed of consequence, and the hard part is making sure those rules are more than a speech and a framed photo on a chief's wall. You make them show up when it's inconvenient. You make them roll up in black sedans when someone in a uniform forgets who the public is. If you stuck with me this far, here's the part where I turn it back to you, because a story isn't finished until people sit with it and poke at it and argue with it, and that's how towns get better. Not by nodding to the news and moving on, but by talking at kitchen tables and council meetings and comment sections that don't devolve immediately into noise. So tell me, was the state takeover too much, or just enough? Is disbanding a department justice or a last resort you keep for emergencies? Have you ever seen a badge used like a burden the right way or like a crown the wrong way? And what happened next in your street, in your family, in your town? And if you've got a cop who changed your life for the better, put that in here too, because accountability isn't a bonfire, it's a ledger, and good entries matter as much as bad ones. And if this reminded you of a day you were small and someone made you feel smaller, or a day you stood your ground and held your voice steady even when your cheek stung, I want to hear it. Drop your story below. Argue with me. If you need to bring receipts, bring hope, hit subscribe. If you want more stories told, plain that, start quiet and end in a place where breathing gets easier. Because a badge isn't a crown, and justice isn't a speech. It's a job. We do together, one choice, then another, and then the next one.